There we go. All right. So let's review a little bit then. Okay, last time we were in the Church of Pergamos. We talked about a dude named Antipas. And this guy, even though his name is like anti-father, he ends up being a martyr. So might not have been a good guy, but in the end, he chooses he chooses to martyrdom over changing his religion, basically. Then we got on farther into it and found out that this church has also the doctrines of Balaam and of Nicolaitans. And Balaam and Nicolaitans are basically the same thing. It's just the Nicolaitans are like more extravagant than Balaam, is really all it comes down to. And these are the things that are going on in that church. And I said that, back then I said that tithes and Balaam are linked. And that the best way to understand that was to understand what the tithe actually was about. And we went to a couple places, Numbers, Deuteronomy. So we found out that the chain of custody actually for a tithe actually goes, God blesses the people because they're following his laws, okay? And then they're supposed to take the tithe of the increase of that blessing, take 10% of it and present it at the temple to the Levites, okay? Now in Deuteronomy we find out that those Levites then count that tithe that they get just like you would corn from the threshing floor. Then they tithe 10% on that, and they take and present it to the high priest, as the first one was Aaron. And that was how the chain of custody then that went for the tithe. And their responsibility with that then was to take care of some things, not just the Levites. They had a lot of cattle. They had material possessions that were being brought in, and all these were properties of Levites. The Levites did not have a land in the homeland. They didn't have land, right? And so the tithe was their inheritance. Yeah. And that's exactly what God says about it in the book of Numbers, that the tithe is the inheritance for the Levites since they have no portion of the land. And that's very important when it comes to the chain of custody for the tithe then. So, nonetheless, they had this great wealth. Part of that great wealth comes that great responsibility that they had, is that they were to care for all the strangers and make sure that they were taken care of. Not only were the priest teachers, they were also the judges, okay? And when it talks about the strangers in the gate, and the gate was where the judgment occurred, was in the gates of the city. And then whatever the judgment then was then taken out. And if it was death, well, they were taken out the gates and killed. That was where judgment was handed out, right? So there's a lot that went with that. After the stranger, then the fatherless and the widow, and that was one of the reasons God considers that the tithe is being ripped off, is because it no longer goes to take care of the Levite or to take care of the fatherless or the stranger or the widow, and now goes to somebody's European vacation or a light bill, right, or some, like the mission group that reached out to the Marshallese, instead of taking care of people where they chose to take the tithe, all right? And he considers that then to be that he says it in Malachi, can you steal from God? You're doing it in the sense of tithe and offerings. Okay. So enough about that then. Okay. So there's part of that doctrine right there. Now Balaam, let's just figure out what Balaam's all about. Now, and the best place to understand Balaam is the book of Numbers 2, and it's in chapter 22. And look at that. That just flipped all the way around on my glasses. All right. We'll see if we can get through it just the same. All right, chapter 22 and in verse 1. All right, and we're going to go until we understand exactly what it is that could be considered doctrinal that Balaam is involved in. All right. Okay, Numbers chapter 22. Let me get this here set up just how I want. All right, and it reads, And the children of Israel set forward and pitched in the plains of Moab on this side of Jordan by Jericho. And Balak, the son of Zippor, saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites. Now, Israel had destroyed the Amorites. All right? Now, they had an option. If I remember how it goes, God told them, if he'll just let you through, just go on through. If I remember how the story goes, and they chose not to and ended up fighting about it, and they lost. But the Amorites were destroyed, and I think that was when it was. But I could be wrong about that. But if I am, forgive me. If not, it's not important anyway. All right. Verse 3, And Moab, all right, which is the people that we're talking about, was sore afraid of the people because they were many. Had several million come out of Egypt during the Exodus, all right? And Moab was distressed because of the children of Israel. And Moab said unto the elders of Midian, how shall this company lick up all that are around about us, as if an ox licketh up the grass of the field? And Balak, son of Zippor, king of the Moabites at that time. Zippor was the king of the Moabites at that time. He sent messengers, therefore, unto Balaam, the son of Beor, to Pethor, which is by the river of the land of the children of his people, to call him, saying, Behold, there is a people come out of Egypt. Behold, they cover the whole face of the earth, and they abide over against me. All right. So here we have the Moabite king. He's faced with these people that are literally, there's, I think the best estimate, somewhere around 3 or 4 million of them at that time. And they're right outside of his traditional lands. And he's just flat worried that they're just going to invade.
Yeah.
Okay, so he's really scared. He doesn't understand. He's already saw them that had destroyed the Amorites, and now they're at his door. So he's a little bit worried. So what does he do? He sends for this dude. All right. Now you're getting ready to get introduced to this dude named Balaam. Now Balaam, on one hand, kind of has a little bit of understanding of biblical law, but on the other hand, then he drops the ball on it. So the guy, what I'm getting at is the guy's probably not a Hebrew. He's definitely not a Levite. All right. Yeah. So that means he's probably just some soothsayer that was in the region of Mesopotamia, and apparently he's been able to acquire some sort of a reputation as somebody who can curse or bless. All right. And this king knows about this. All right. Now he sends messengers, therefore, unto Balaam, son of Beor, to Pethor, which is right a river, the children of the people. All right. Behold, there comes verse 6 is where we actually are. Come now, therefore, I pray thee, curse me this people, for they are too mighty for me. And peradventure, or perhaps I shall prevail, that we may smite them, and that I may drive them out of the land. For I am wrought that he whom, because I know, or I'm wrought, that he whom thou bless is blessed, and he whom thou curse is cursed. Okay. A good point I want to bring up here is that about cursing. A lot of people will turn to that and say that's cussing. All right? But here Balaam is not being hired to stand on a river or stand on the bank and cuss at the people. He's trying to curse them. Yeah. Now, when the Bible talks about cursing, it's talking about this kind of cursing, not cussing. Cussing is something, if it makes your grandmama mad, don't do it. All right? It's that kind of a deal, all right? But sometimes people try to make a little bit more out of that than what he's actually talking about. Okay, but nonetheless, here we find out that Balaam, he's a soothsayer. This guy believes that he is going to be able to curse these people, and that maybe he'll be able to prevail against them. All right. Now, verse 7. This is where we get actually what his doctrines are. And the elders of Moab, and the elders of Midian departed with rewards of divination in their hand, and they came unto Balaam and spake unto him the words of Balak. All right. So Balak sends these high-levered muckety ducks with money, to hire Balaam to curse Israel. Now this goes on. This scene continues. We're not going to do it because it repeats like 3 times. Each time he sends more important people with greater and greater reward. Okay, and each time Balaam wants to go, but he doesn't. He does a pretty good job towing the load. About the 3rd time, this king gets mad at Balaam. He's like, look, I hired you to curse these people, and 3 times you've altogether blessed them. And Balaam's like, I can't. There's nothing I can do. I said, I can't. If God blesses these people, I can do nothing. And so he does a pretty good job towing the line. Now, the nitty-gritty gets to be this. God tells them, they come to him one last time, the 4th time, and God tells Balaam, all right, if they come back, you can go with them. Well, Balaam just blows that off as soon as they wake up. He gets up, saddles his ass. He's off chasing them. He wants to go get his payday, okay? Now, I don't just say that out there just willy-nilly because of one thing. Listen to what it says in Jude in verse 11. Warn to them, for they have gone the way of Cain, talking about the people in the last days and the feeling and all those things that are showing up. And what's it say? And ran greedily after the heir of Balaam for reward, and perished in the gainsaying of Korah. All right. At the end of the story with Balaam, that's where you find him. He ends up dead. When Israel invades, he ends up getting killed in the whole shooting caboodle of the overthrow anyway. All right, and that's where they end up finding. That's where Balaam ends up. All right, so he follows it, and he's again, it's after reward. And then in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 15 says the same thing. It says, which have forsaken the right way and gone astray, following the way of Balaam, son of Bosor, who loved the wages of unrighteousness. All right. So look at what Balaam is getting paid to do. He's supposed to curse these people, all right? And he's done it with what would be out of what we would call the tithes, all right? That's where Balaam's reward is actually coming from then, all right? So you got to understand, Balaam is prophesying for money, and you see this all the time. All right? You got cable TV at your house. Find that group of Christian channels or whatever they call it, and walk through and see what they're doing. Every one of them are prophesying for money, and you'll hear it. You'll hear what's on their mind, because you'll hear one of them. He'll stand up. God's told me that there's going to be 5 of you come down in the next 10 minutes with $1,000 right in front of me. All right, and you hear this kind of thing all and over. And then you've even heard some of them. In my life, I've heard a couple of them. The big names, they even take it a little bit farther. They'll say, if I don't get $500,000, God's going to kill me. I mean, I've heard these things. These different places have done stuff. And it's just the doctrines of Balaam. All right? You got to realize, these churches are chasing the tithe. That's why God was mad, remember? And it's because it wasn't going to the Levites who was their inheritance. This is going to some wackadoodle who's standing on the pulpit claiming to represent Christ. When in fact, all he's doing is fleecing old women and people for their money. And that's just where the rubber meets the road with the doctrines of Balaam. For them, it's about the money. And you see that.
These are vulnerable people.
Right. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Many churches are supported by poor people,
essentially the
and
definition
elderly.
of evil.
Right.
That's crazy.
And to use the idea of the tithe, that's just, to me, it's a very, very simple thing to do, to use the idea of the tithe. Because the tithe was supposed to go to the Levites as their inheritance. All right. Now the Levites are scattered with the tribes. Most of them don't have them where they are.
Right there.
All right. The only person that can collect tithes then would be Christ. Christ himself, who can collect tithes. Now, I don't want to anybody to get the wrong impression to say that I'm not for tithing to a good church. That's not what I'm saying. All right. If you got a good church, you have to support it, because that's where you're being fed. That's what it comes down to. A church is supposed to teach the book. All right. If they're not feeding the people, you're a pastor. You're supposed to take care of the pastor where the sheep feed. It's just over and over, that's the analogy for people. Why? Because sheep are stupid. All right. And the shepherd is supposed to take care of the pastor and feed them the word of God. That's what they're supposed to be fed, but they're not being fed. Instead, they're being fleeced. And that's happening from pulpits. And it happens from many other ones all around. In my life, I've seen it many times. Okay? I've sat in congregations where the page passed over and over, when I could look around and probably guess that half the people there didn't have 10% of their income to give to begin with. Yeah, and you'll have a lot of these do-good preachers who say, well, you're just trying to rob people of their blessing because you can't outgive God. Well, maybe not. You can't outgive God, but what they're trying to get you to do is just give their money to you by saying that. Give your money to them, by saying that. You're not giving it to God. They want your money. All right? God created the entire universe and didn't spend a penny. Okay? He has no need for your money. Now, if you have a good church, support it, please. That's not what I'm saying. Like I said, you get a blessing for supporting a good church if it's teaching the Bible, if it's reaching out and it's doing some good and it's making some difference, actually teaching what's in it. And the only way for you to know if that's happening is to know what's in it yourself. That's just how that breaks down. Yeah. But nonetheless, that takes care of Balaam and Nicolaitans. You get the point. They're chasing the tithe. They think it belongs to them, and it's their reward for prophesying to you. And that's the way they look at it, which is not the way the Bible views tithes. Now, alms are a little bit different. Yeah. A tithe means 10%. Like I said, if you're on Social Security, you don't have 10% of your income to give. Most of the people, I know that have retired don't have 10% of their income to give. They can't afford it. and it's just ridiculous, and it's just it's a yoke of uneven burden that's placed on elderly people particularly. A lot of churches are supported, 50% or greater from people over the age of 65 who are retired and on fixed incomes. So that's a big sticking point with me. But nonetheless, so we finished up then with Balaam. We got a good look on Nicolaitan's Balaam. Nicolaitan's mentioned twice. Balaam's mentioned one time. That means that out of today's churches, the doctrines of Balaam and Nicolaitan are a dominant doctrine within churches. That's just a numerical thing that you can identify from how many times it's mentioned and what's spoken of it. All right, so it's something to be watched out for. And like I said, that's just part of the fleecing that's happening from pulpits. Yeah. All right. Okay, so now let's go back to let's go ahead and go back to the book of Revelation. I think we are actually in chapter 2, aren't we? Let me go look, just make sure.
Chapter 2 and 14.
And that might be right. You might be right. That sounds actually. And let's just see. I'll click on 14. Well, I'm down to 16 is what I got, but all right. And actually, let's go on going down to 18 because we just finished up the Pergamus because we read through it and then we just went back and covered up all of them and covered all of what it was. So we're on to the next church, which is Thyatira. Now, Thyatira is another interesting one. Something I haven't ever addressed about these churches. You notice I'm not spending much time working the names of them. Okay? And the reason why, from the time that this letter was penned till now, those names have not only changed, but the locations of these churches have expanded and changed completely anyway. So I don't believe there's a whole lot of meaning in the church that it used to be. The more meaning comes from the church that it is today. And the name's kind of insignificant. It could be true. It could be labeled 1 through 7. It really wouldn't matter, what the name that you stuck on it. There are some interesting things about those churches that are kind of interesting, but I choose not to cover too much of them when I'm going through it. But in chapter 2, verse 18, and it reads, "And unto the angel of the church of Thyatira write, these things saith the Son of God, who hath eyes like unto a flame of fire, and his feet like fine brass." And of course, we know where that's from. We talked about that in the book of Ezekiel. Verse 18, "I know thy works and thy charity and service and faith and thy patience and thy works." So you mentioned works twice. And the last being more than the first. All right. "Notwithstanding," verse 20, "I have a few things against thee, because thou sufferest that woman Jezebel, which calleth herself a prophetess, to teach and to seduce my servants to commit fornication and to eat things sacrificed unto idols." Okay. First of all, the fornication. By now you should be getting a little bit sharper on what that kind of fornication is. It's not the flesh fornication. It's a spiritual fornication. It's the same. It's that same idolatry that is a spiritual adultery. And that's why God uses that relationship between a man and a woman to describe how he feels about him and his people. Because he looks at his people as the Hebrew word is Hephzibah, means wife. That these people, that the people, not just the Hebrew people, all of mankind are his children. And this age is about getting his children back. You can never really lose thought on that. But nonetheless, Jezebel here, he says that she calls herself a prophetess. Now, you'll hear the word Jezebel used a lot in our culture, and they usually refer to a woman who is being in some way immoral with her body, often. Okay, now, I'm not saying Jezebel didn't do that. I'm just saying that she has a greater sin than what she has produced with her body, is all I'm getting at. And that was to cause the children to commit spiritual adultery, which would be to worship the Antichrist, since we're here in the book of Revelation. And the best way to understand that is then just to understand a little bit about Jezebel. Now, to understand Jezebel, we got to go back to where we just were. We were just there, and you will have her labeled the doctrines of Jezebel right there. I just something that I do sometimes with her. It's just to match things. Jezebel, I just did a search with my Strong's for Jezebel, and it finds out there's 20 verses with 23 different matches. So that means out of 20 verses, her name's used 23 different times. So that means there's been somewhere in the Bible, there's been some really focus on her, and you happen to find that, and we're going to just start covering them. All 23 of these matches are down below in the next, and everything for the rest of this page of those matches and things that come from that. There are some things I want to bring out, like in 1 Kings 16:31, and it came to pass as if it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nehat, that he took to wife Jezebel, the daughter of Ethabel, king of the Zidonians, and went and served Baal and worshipped him. First of all, what he's talking about Ahab. Ahab is the king, all right? And what he has done is the king can marry from all the tribes of Israel, okay? He could pick any wife that he wanted from any of them. It didn't have to be from his tribe. It could be any of them, all right? But what he chose to do, much like Solomon, was he decided that he can marry a foreigner from another country and then bring her into Israel. Solomon does this, all right? Well, he's done the same thing, and this woman that he's brought in is Jezebel. And now Jezebel's a little bit snaky. She's seducing the king Ahab. At one point, she tries to play the role of a prostitute to try to seduce another guy, and that's where she draws her bad name from. But her bad name for that's not what she deserves her bad name for. The fact that she went and served Baal and worshipped him, that's the thing. Now, Jezebel uses her position then as the queen, as the regent in Israel, then to do a few things, and you start to find out about that, like in 1 Kings 18:4. For it was so when Jezebel cut off the prophets of the Lord that Obadiah took 100 prophets and hid them by 50 in a cave and fed them with bread and water. That's the next two verses of what that's talking about. So she gathered up all the prophets that were in Israel and killed all them, except for 100 people that Obadiah, who was one of Ahab's servants. Yeah. Then he feared God, and he's like, "Oh, I'm hiding 100 of them and saving them from the wrath of Jezebel." Okay, now, like 1 Kings 18:19. Now, therefore, send and gather to me all of Israel. This is Elijah talking. Unto Mount Carmel, and the prophets of Baal 450, and the prophets of the grove 400, which did eat at Jezebel's table. So you got 850 different false prophets and that eat it, what he's called it, that Jezebel, by eating at her table, that means she's just providing funds. Think about that like on a national level. The president's wife is diverting. I'm not saying that's what's happening, but it's an analogy. Yeah, it'd be like the president's wife diverting federal funds to support, say, it's Satan's church or whatever. Okay. And not only is she just diverting funds, she's active. She's killed all of them except for the one, right? All except for the ones. So she's really earning her reputation, okay? She's doing it, as what I'm getting at. All right. Let's see if we have some more of the stuff. We're going to follow up on that here in just a second. Now, let's see. There was one, where just said 1 Kings 21:25. But there was none like unto Ahab. This is speaking of how evil he was, which did sell himself to work wickedness in the sight of the Lord. Now, this is the king he's talking about, whom Jezebel, his wife, stirred up. Okay, so you see all this stuff that happened, it is Ahab. Ahab is such a weak leader as the king of Israel that he's allowing this foreign woman to come in. Now she's building. You will miss it. Baal and then Grove is Ashtaroth. Grove worship comes from the Ashtaroth. Now, Ashtaroth, Baalism, Moloch, these are the big three. They had something in common, and it was child sacrifice. Okay? And it was in the Grove, but the Ashtaroth was where these children were sacrificed.
Even in mythology now, Baal
is huge, right? Name, all these names, the Ashtaroth, right? All these things are still
being.
Yes, and they're still alive in the culture that we live in to this day. And
good things.
That's right, and they're not, and they weren't.
Like the desolate.
I don't know what it means. Right, that's right.
Yeah.
Baal, Moloch, and Ashtaroth all indulge in child sacrifice.
Crazy.
Now, when I started studying the Ashtaroth, I started getting a lot of medical references for these guys. Yeah, and it started making a little bit of sense. These guys, the Ashtaroth, they could cure you of some things, but it was always going to cost you some stuff. And I think probably the ultimate one was, we can help you, but it's going to cost you. And the child was it. All right? There's usually two ways this went with Ashtaroth. It's usually a big bull-like thing with a huge set of horns, all right? And the way it went was it was a statue that
Oh,
had
I know
a false
what you're
back
talking
on
about.
it, and they
The
would
iron
take the
bull.
child, like the iron bull, and
That's
put a
what it
child
is,
in
yeah.
it, and then shut it, and
then
build a fire
start a
under
fire.
it, right? And then just cook them alive.
Roast that kid.
Or the other one was they took, and the arms would be the stack that let the heat out,
yeah.
and then they would build a fire even beneath that, and then lay them across the arms and sacrifice them this way. Now, the point is, these are all demonic. These are all the Astaroth, Moloch, and Baal are all fallen angels. Okay, every one of them stem from fallen angels. All right. And it just goes to show you how in depth that when they show back up, see, when they know these names, we already know these names. They're alive today for a reason, so we would know them. Then it's,
and it feels so normal.
That's right. That's right. You say Baal, right, and you got that. You just don't even creep you out, right?
Yeah.
See, but that.
But the affirmation, the knowing that you knew that.
That's right. Even beforehand.
Even if you didn't know
the rest of it, right?
A feeling of.
Just dirty.
Dirty.
Just dirty, yeah. Just dirty.
Wow.
Okay. Now, there's a bright spot in all this with Jezebel, okay? There's this dude named Elijah. And Elijah is one of my favorite prophets in the Bible. And mostly because he's like the cockiest one I've ever met. Or not met, but ever read about. All right? And he's just flat cocky. And if you're going to be cocky about this stuff, this is the way to do it. Let's see, where's that at? That is in... Let me make sure I got my notes right here. Okay, yes, we're going to 1 Kings 18, verse 17. Let's just do it in my book so it shows up in my Bible real good. What did I say, 1 Kings 18, what did I say, 17? Was that right? Well, that sure is the right bunch, Elijah and Ahab. We'll go with that. Okay, yeah, we're going to pick it up in 17. All right, now, Elijah is God's chosen prophet. He sent him away at this brook for a while and had the ravens bring him food, and there's been this great drought that's been going on. Okay, now, it's time for a prophet off. We're going to have that's what I call it. I don't know what else to call it. But Elijah he considers himself to be the last and single prophet of God that's left. All right? And we know we just read how many were sitting at Jezebel's table, 450 for Baal priests and 400 for the Ashtaroth and the groves. All right? So those numbers, that's your numbers right there. And Elijah's always in battles where these are the kind of numbers that he's dealing with. He's always him and Elijah and everybody, and then there's everything else that's going on. But he's one of my favorite prophets, and you're getting ready to find out why. All right, verse 17, and we'll just let the Bible speak for how Baal gets dealt with, all right? And it came, but there is one thing I want to go back and I want to cover. You're going to like this, but I just want to seal this little spot real quick before we get on to that. All right, and it's right here. Okay, Elijah is going to be calling down fire from heaven, all right? But before we get into it, I want you to know what fire from heaven really is, all right? And in Luke chapter 9, verse 54, there's the apostles asked Christ this question. It says, and when his disciple James and John saw this, talking about these people, and said, Lord, wilt thou that we command fire to come down from heaven and consume them, even as Elias, which is the Greek word for Elijah, did, okay? But the word here is pour, and the word specifically means lightning. All right, so when we're talking about fire from heaven, what we're talking about is lightning being called down. Now, if you're a student of the book of Revelation, you'll know that is one of the things that the Antichrist is also quoted as being able to do. That he'll snap his fingers and draw, and right in the front of people will be able to draw lightning down from heaven. All right, so I think that means that he's going to try to knock off a little bit of Elijah's stuff as he's young. But this is one of the times. Now, this is Elijah's encounter with the Baal prophets that we're going to get to. Remember, when he says fire from heaven, it says fire, but what it means is lightning, according to the New Testament, okay? And now I want you to keep that in mind. And now let's go back here to 17. All right, verse 17 of 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 17. And it came to pass when Ahab, the same guy we've been talking about, saw Elijah, that Ahab said unto him, Art thou he that troubleth Israel? And he answered, I have not troubled Israel, but thou and thy father's house And in that you have forsaken the commandments of the Lord, and thou hast followed Balaam, which is Baalism if you were going to translate it to the English all the way. All right? So that's the sin then that Jezebel's doing. She's the false prophet that leads them to Baal. And so that's the way he's looking at these just churches that we're studying in Thyatira where Jezebel's present. Their doctrines, the things that they're doing are going to cause the people to worship the Antichrist then when he appears, all right? So you follow where we are with that. Okay, verse 19. Now, therefore, send and gather to me all Israel unto Mount Carmel, and the priests of Baal, 450, and the prophets of the grove, 400, which ate at Jezebel's table. So Ahab sent unto the children of Israel and gathered the prophets together unto Mount Carmel. And Elijah came unto all the people and said, How long have ye between two opinions? All right. So how long, what he's asking them is, how long are you going to have two gods in Israel? Wasn't supposed to be that way ever.
Yeah.
All right. It was only supposed to be one. All right. And if the Lord be God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. All right, so if you let the one that's God, follow the one that is. And the people answered him, not a word. All right, why? Because they know when Elijah shows up, some weird stuff can happen. Because they know Elijah. All right, they know who he is. All right, yeah, he already had a reputation. Right, that's how come Ahab didn't really know how to deal with it.
Right.
All right. Then said Elijah unto the people, even I only remain the prophet of the Lord. So I'm the last one. All right, but Baal's prophets are 450 men. Let them therefore give us 2 bullocks, and let them choose 1 bullock for themselves, cut it in pieces, and lay it upon the wood, and put no fire under it. And I will dress the other bullock, and lay it upon the wood, and put no fire under it. All right, so he's laying out the conditions of the little prophet off they got going on right here. Now, one thing I noticed from this is he's giving them first choice. All right. So naturally, the Baal prophets are going to pick the prettiest bull. All right. And to them, that gives them the advantage in this because Elijah's conceding the best to Baal. That's what he's saying. But what the Baal prophets don't realize is that they take that better bull, and as soon as they sacrifice it in Baal's name, it's an unfit sacrifice. So even the dreg that remains of the other one becomes the better sacrifice that's available of the two. Okay, so you see my point. By sacrificing one animal to Baal, you've made it an unfit sacrifice anyway, no matter how perfect it was to begin with. All right. Now, so he's going to go, but say make an altar, and cut him, sacrifice it, and put it down. All right. Call ye on the name of your gods, little g, and I will call on the name of the Lord. And the God that answereth by fire, let him be God. And all the people answered and said, It is well spoken. All right, they agree with Elijah. Now, I don't realize how much of a setup this was. All right, but this is a purity setup. And I love it. Now, verse 25. And Elijah said unto the prophets of Baal, Choose you 1 bullock for yourselves and dress it. And dress it first. All right, he's giving them first choice. They're going to pick the best one. All right. For ye are many, and call on the name of your gods, and put no fire under it. Verse 26. And they took the bullock which was given them, and they dressed it, and called on the name of Baal from morning until noon, saying, O Baal, hear us. But there was no voice, nor any answer, and they leapt upon the altar which they had made. Verse 27. And it came to pass at noon that Elijah mocked them. Now you just have to sink in real good. Elijah's 1 against 450, and this dude is running his sewer. He's mocking them. He's not being nice. Okay, listen. I like that. That's gutsy. That's a Marine thing right there. That dude, he would have been a good chesty puller. You guys don't know who he is. But anyway, but Elijah mocked them and said, Cry aloud, for he is a God, for he is a God. Either he is talking, or he is pursuing, or he is on a journey, or peradventure he sleepeth and must be awakened. All right. Now, the thing which a lot of that's kind of funny, and this journey is funny, but the thing I wanted pursuing, the thing that's interesting about pursuing, it doesn't come out and quite say it. But if you look at what pursuing means, it means to withdraw to a private place. So I want you to think about the scene. Baal's supposed to be standing there among them. When you're in a big group like that, like in a battle or something, and you withdraw to a private place, what are you doing?
You're running.
You're peeing.
Oh, yeah.
That's really what Elijah asked him. He's like, he's pursuing. Oh, where's Baal? Is he peeing? Or maybe he's asleep. Maybe you should wake him up. I mean, that's good. You gotta like that. You gotta like that in a guy. He's gutsy. You can say what you want, but he's gutsy. All right. But nonetheless, on verse 8 or 28, and they cried aloud. Now listen to these good religious people. And they cried aloud and cut themselves after a manner with knives and lancets until the blood gushed out of them. All right. And it came to pass when midday was past that they prophesied until the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice, that there was neither voice nor any answer nor any regard, that any regarded. Okay, now I don't want you to overread this because you might not know what this is talking about. This is the time of the evening offering, all right? This was called the daily oblation in the law. And what the daily oblation was a sacrifice that happened every day in the morning and every day in the evening, every day. It was called the daily oblation. One in the morning, one in the evening, every day. Even on feast days like Passover, where you had literally thousands and thousands of sacrifices, every day in the morning was the daily oblation. Every day in the evening was the daily oblation, all at the same time. All right, so I want you to pay attention to that, because this is look what Elijah does. And Elijah said unto all the people, come near unto me. All right. He's a teacher. First thing he does is gather the people to him. All right. Says, come near unto me. And all the people came near unto him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord that was broken down. All right. Now it wasn't Baal's altar. All right. That's made out of brick. The law says that when you build an altar, you don't put a hammer to it. You just build the altar with what's provided, and that's good enough for an altar. All right. Yeah. It wasn't that way with Baal. But what he's doing, he's repairing the altar that had already been there. But before Jezebel killed all the prophets and tore down God's altar and put up Baal's altar, and now he's went to the correct altar first of all. All right? And he took 12 stones according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob. This is one for each of the tribes of Israel. All right? Unto whom the word of the Lord came, saying, Israel shall be thy name. And with the stones, with that stone, those 12 tribes, and this is important because this is also prophecy, that very altar is going to be rebuilt again. All right? And he's building it out of the same thing, out of those same 12 tribes, which we're going to get to as we get deeper into the book of Revelation. We're going to have to just deal with those tribes, just flat in their face, all right? But here Elijah uses those names, each stone, each one for each of those of the tribes of Israel, all right? And with the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he made a trench about the altar, as great as would contain 2 measures of seed. And he put the wood in order, and cut the bullock in pieces, and laid it upon the wood, and said, fill 4 barrels of water, and pour it upon the burnt sacrifice and on the wood. And he said, do it a second time. And they did it a second time. And he said, do it a third time. And they did it a third time. And the water ran down about the altar and filled the trench also with the water. Okay, so the scene is painted. Now, since you know what fire is that's going to be called down from heaven, what does he just did dumping all that water on all that?
Huge.
Just made a
Huge
connection.
conductor.
That's right.
Yeah, dude,
he
that's all it is.
soaked it. All right, he flat soaked it. That's some science going in there.
Yeah.
Now Elijah doesn't understand that, so he has to got these instructions from God because this is a setup.
Yeah,
That's like I said.
they don't understand.
They don't understand that that's
Plasma.
electricity, right?
Yeah.
They don't understand what that is, right? Yeah. And look, here it goes. Now, look what Elijah does. And it came to pass at the correct time, the one of the evening oblation, all right, the evening sacrifice, that Elijah the prophet came near and said, Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and of Israel, let it be known this day that thou art God in Israel, and that I am thy servant, and that I have done all these things according to the things at thy will. Hear me, O Lord, hear me. that these people may know that thou art the Lord God, and that thou hast turned their heart back again. Then fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt sacrifice and the wood and the stone and the dust and licked up the water that was in the trench. And when all the people saw it, they fell on their face. And they said, Lord, this is the God, the Lord, he is the God. And Elijah said unto them, take the prophets of Baal, let not one of them escape. And they took them, and Elijah brought them down to the brook Kishon and slew them there. All right. So, in the end, it's the one prophet. Now, this is a big end time lesson, all right? Because in the last days, if you're called to testify, you get the world. If you will be called to testify in the last days, the world will literally be standing against you. All right? And that's why you'll hear me say it a lot. To testify in the last days during the reign of the Antichrist means you have to testify against a chicken in every pot, against your electric bill being paid, your mortgage being paid, food on the table, all right? Your children, right? All these things. But you get the point, okay? And to testify against that, you're gonna be hated, and it says that because of me, during that time, that the world will. You're not gonna hate you. You know what you're doing.
Gonna happen,
you know what you're doing.
In a real
right?
sense,
Well,
those feelings are still gonna exist.
Well, they're gonna. Yeah, you're gonna feel right. You're gonna feel. It's gonna hurt.
It's gonna hurt.
Because everybody that testifies, somebody close betrays them.
One person should be able to take, but because of what's the end product of it, you're going to be able to.
Now remember, you got to remember, Christ was deceived by one of his own, one of the 12.
Yeah.
Same thing happens with everybody else. If they're to testify, it's somebody who is close. Right. Now, you got to remember, just as the people that testify were preordained, they were born to do that thing, these people that deliver them up also are. Because without them, it doesn't happen. All right, just like with Christ, with the crucifixion of Christ, without what why is his name going away? The guy that betrayed Christ, Judas. Lord, what happened to my brain? Yeah, him. Without Judas, the crucifixion wouldn't have occurred.
Yeah.
All right.
He told Judas.
He told him. He goes, right. He goes, do what you got to do. We talked about this. Right. No biggie. Right. And he repented afterwards. He did. He went right back to the Kenites.
Of course he did.
They repented, gave them back their money. And the only thing they could do with it was buy potter's field. They didn't want to touch it either because they knew. They knew it was money. Right. All right. So, okay. So now we get it. We get Jezebel. Jezebel's a false prophet because of what she does. It leads all the rest of the people astray. All right. Now, bearing that in mind, then let's go back to the book of Revelation, where we were. Were we still in chapter 2?
I think we're just about done with
the
last little end part.
Yes, last little bit. Yes. No. That's smart. We already did that one. That's that one. There we go. All right. Sacrifice and that. So, okay, we got the fornication. That was the thing I wanted. Jezebel causes people to commit spiritual fornication. The leaders of these churches, because of the things that they are not teaching, is really the better way to say it. They're not teaching the difference between the two morning stars. All right? Lucifer, the morning star, and Christ, the bright morning star. All right? If you put the two of them together and you're looking at them, you can tell by reason of who's brighter, which is which one. All right? But if they both go away for a couple of thousand years and only one of them appears,
nobody's going to know.
All right, will you be able to tell if it's Jesus or not? That's it. Can you tell the difference? Right. And the best way, the only way to really know that is to understand what's going on, what the mark of the beast really is, what the number 666 really means. We're going to be sealed before it's over because it's chapter 6 where the seals are. All right. And those things actually get you sealed. The key to understanding the book of Revelation is that first morning star is known which one that is. And that's the fake morning star. That's the fake white horse. And whenever he appears and whatever he does, that's why it's written. It says, if it says I'm here, it says if Christ is here, he's here, believe him not. And why? Because when the Messiah appears, you will know it. Everybody who was ever born will know it.
Yeah.
Ever been born will
ever
know
been
it.
born, yeah.
Right, and you won't miss that. Right. But what the Bible says is that
think so.
before that the Antichrist
He'll
appears.
slip in.
That's right, and that's what causes the problems. All right.
All of us, yes.
So we're in verse 21. All right. Now listen to what he says about that. He says, I gave her space to repent of her fornication. He gave her room, just like we've been talking about in the garden. Everybody, Cain room,
everybody.
Adam, Eve, everybody got room. Even Lucifer himself got room. All right, but they didn't take him up on it. It says, and she repented not. 22, behold, I will cast her in bed. This is spiritually, right? And then that commit adultery, spiritual fornication, with her in great tribulation, which is the tribulation of the Antichrist, except they repent of their deeds. All right? So if they repent, that's important right there, because realize what they've done. Yeah. The Antichrist has appeared. They've been calling him Jesus. And somewhere along the line, they start getting they begin to understand, wait a minute, there's something, right? Yeah. So he's telling them, you've got room to repent.
You can repent
right? And so that gives you some clues in, because a lot of them will tell you that once the book of Revelation starts, there's no repentance. Yeah, you can't do that.
Or you're on one side or the other.
Yeah, right. And that's not what this says. Right.
You know what I mean?
The whole
point. It
point.
would not be up until the last second.
We will get, there's a point. He says the door's shut. There's a point he'll say, the door's closed. At this point, then it's over. But that's almost the very, very end of it, all right, by then. But nonetheless, that's that great tribulation. But he gives them room again. It's time for them a place for them to repent. And I will kill her children with death. And remember, that death is spiritual. That's the Antichrist. And think about those children that are delivered up, because that's what they're doing. If your mother deceives a child and delivers her up to death, that's exactly what that's talking about. All right. And all the churches shall know that I am he which searcheth the reins of the heart, and I will give unto every one according to their works. But unto you I say, and unto the rest of Thyatira, as many have not this doctrine, and which have not known the depths of Satan as they speak, I will put upon you none other burden. All right. So for that church, he's telling them, look, the only thing you got to do is keep your head down and be quiet. I'm not going to ask you to do any more. As long as you just realize what's going on, I'm not going to ask you to do any more. So just hunker down and hang on. It's almost over. You'll find well, you already know from chapter 9 that it only lasts 5 months. All right. And most of that, the Antichrist doesn't appear till 2.5 months into that 5-month period. All right. So that means he only reigns for 2.5 months. And that's when you won't be able to buy, sell, or trade without bearing that mark of the beast, all right? So it's 2.5 months that people have to learn to focus on, all right? But the thing that's going to kill them is nobody knows about the fallen angels. Nobody really teaches anything of substance anyway about the fallen angels, not their mode of travel, not the way that they operate, nothing. So when that begins to happen, that's what messes everybody up. That one event, I'm telling you, Ezekiel's wheels, when you don't doubt, when you just not imagine, when you look up and you can see one of them over there and another one over there, and it's that condition all around the world, then you know what time you're actually in. I mean, and that's just going to thunder. That's going to make people just. You can imagine. Know. They made movies about
this.
To
me, it's going to be so dramatic.
I think it's going to. That's right. Literally. That's right. Literally. That's exactly right.
There's going to be layers of the universe opened up to us that we've never seen.
So for this church, then, he's just telling them to hang on, all right? But that which you have already, hold fast until I come. It's just hang on, all right? As long as, now, that was conditional. As long as they had repented or had not at all, associated, right? But that is conditional. That's not just a give me, all right?
Yeah, of course.
And he that overcometh and keep my words unto the end, to him will I give power over nations, all right? So even these people that have, even this church, even though they won't have any other burdens really placed on them, they'll still, if they'll just do this thing, then they'll lead nations in the end before it's over, all right? Which is interesting. Not that anybody's really into that kind of a power, but I think that is interesting. And he shall rule them, speaking of Christ, and he shall rule them with a rod of iron, as a vessel of a potter shall they be broken into shaves, even as I received of my Father. Now, that, I think that has a lot to do with talking about the transfiguration, because at the transfiguration, at the actual seventh trumpet, well, it's the end of flesh. It's done.
We're gone.
We're not gone, but the flesh is
Yeah.
gone, right?
What we know is ourselves is gone.
Right, that part, right, the flesh part anyway, because yes, and all those flesh hang-ups that we have, the flesh sins, the things that get in our way every day that just drive us, at that point, all those things are gone. Those won't be a consideration
become
anymore. Yeah, they're just
Yeah.
meaningless. It means
So,
nothing at that
I
point,
got you.
right? So that's not just that's a big change of mental. That's an elevated plane of thought, right? Yeah, it's an elevated way of thinking, right.
Beyond what any human was capable of.
Right, and I will give, and what's the reward? And I will give him the morning star, the true one, not the phony one, right? He's nothing here. Let him hear what the Spirit's saying to the churches. All right. That finishes up chapter Thyatira, the church what I'm trying to come up. Chapter 2 was what I was trying to say, and trying to come up with a name at the same time. All right, so that finishes them. So now we're getting to begin then to get a better understanding of how God actually views the churches in the last days. Now, many of us, we come from a little bit different backgrounds than a lot of church people. I mean, let's just face it. It's a rougher place. We know there's a rough world out there, and you walk in it, sometimes you just get dirty just because that's just the way it is. I mean, right. But the churches themselves, God has a lot of patience for them. I don't, but God does, and that so. And he says it. He said it in 2 Peter. We studied before. He's long suffering. He's not willing that any of his children should perish. Yeah. He doesn't want any of them to go away. So that's why he's patient about all this stuff coming about. But the generation of the fig tree, we're going to stop right here probably tonight, but the generation of the fig tree was named in 1948.
Yeah,
now, that's us, right. It was, and the things that have happened since 1948 are just absurd. The knowledge and technology and things like that it has sparked just within our lifetimes. We've seen the technology curve go straight up. Just our understanding has changed and been reformed and just all kind of stuff. And I don't think any of that's a negative. Like we've talked about that before.
Yeah.
We
wouldn't be able to understand what's going on in Revelation without that.
Yes, until we hit this. We won't be able to understand Job, right?
Even in the 40s, early 40s, you imagined something
like
a spaceship.
And all this stuff has happened since 48, since 1948, right?
What the heck?
We're going to talk about blood being on the moon. Well, Arnold used to teach about that. He said, blood was on the moon. He said the word name Adam means to show blood in the face. All right? He said, we walked on the moon in 1968. And said, the blood is on the moon. We put it there. Adam has walked on the moon. And he said, that's what it's talking about. And it's not talking about any weird thing. I mean, there are some other things, though, that like when the Antichrist appears, he is so bright that the moon and the sun will not be as bright as they were before. Right. But you got to remember when the Messiah returns, that is the light.
Part,
right. The sky rips apart is the only light. That's right.
No, there's a huge difference in the dim compared to putting it out.
That's right. So you got any questions about anything we've covered tonight?
Very interesting lesson for sure.
Learn
the origins of Jezebel, hearing that my whole life.
Right. You do, right? And we're taught the wrong things about it.
There's a lesson learned there. It's not so much as that. She was this big immoral.
Right.
You know what I mean? It sounds like she was just duped into a situation from outside of a situation, and it completely contorted her to something she wasn't. And she was twisted by other outside influences.
She's Baal. Yeah. Well, she was, which
essentially leads down to.
We were talking
Lucifer,
about the king was not allowed to marry outside of the tribes. Okay. In the United States, we keep this law going right now because you cannot ever be the president of the United States unless you have to be a citizen, right? Natural born citizen, right. So we keep this kind of idea alive, and the idea is the same. He has to be natural born, and he couldn't marry outside. The reason why is because marrying outside, that was political.
Yeah,
she brought a lineage in, right? Yes. She brought a lineage in. You're merging two cultures, right?
And
that's
God
a
didn't
big
want
deal,
that. He
yeah.
wanted Israel to stay separate.
Yeah, because
He
that
said, "I
says-
called you to be a nation of priests and kings and priests."
Kings and priests,
Yeah,
right.
so
To lead the others.
Yeah, right, not to do
Not
that.
to
Now
manipulate.
that was for the king. Now the others had a little bit more freedom. Most of them didn't. Oh yeah, they were permitted. They weren't as permitted to, but there was more latitude still allowed. You're going to find there were places where they did kind of go outside. Well, I don't want to use Esau because Esau's first wife, God kills both of his sons. I think if I remember right. Yeah, so never mind. That's bad. That's a bad one. Yeah.
His whole story's messed up, man.
Esau, yeah, well, Esau's at
the
work right now.
beginning,
Esau's at work right now. Esau's Rus is Russia.
Yeah.
All right. And Putin then.
Yeah, he traveled all the way up after leaving
yeah.
Egypt,
Yeah, right. Well, not just Egypt. It was after that.
After that, yeah. I mean, there was a
No,
lot
I'm
of
sorry.
stuff-
It was before that. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
It was before that. Yeah, before they go into Egypt.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They separate before they go into Egypt, and then
Right.
it's Israel that comes out.
Yeah.
Right. Because they go in there's like 80 people, 70 people, something like that, 80 people when they go into Israel, and there's like 3 million or 4 million when they come out 400 years
Wow,
later.
yeah.
You know, but that would be a fun one to teach. I'd love to teach about those people. That's interesting. Hold on, let me turn this. Let me get this.